overcome, which really does bring me now into the last major development or fossil-related development, which is in fact the development of heroic inquiry at Blanchelande, and then the reboot of heroic inquiry at Blanchelande.
Sorry, Darryl, can I just intervene? There's a really great question before you move on.
Yes, please.
Can I get you to answer it?
Yes.
So Matthew Rose has asked, what type of curriculum organisation needed to be previously in place to support your creation of signature inquiries?
That has actually been, I think, one of our most difficult, but I think also one of our most lasting achievements in the development of FOSIL, and then the development of the FOSIL group. So every school that Jenny and I have worked in, since I moved to the UK in 2001, every school that I've worked in has been a school that offers a GCSE and A-level pathway. The only exception to that was the 13 years before we moved to Blanchelande at Oakham School, where they offered the IB diploma program alongside A-levels. By the time we left Oakham, partly as a consequence of the work that we had been doing on inquiry-based learning through FOSIL at the school, they had introduced the IB, the 3-year IB middle years program, after which all children did the GCSE, after which they then chose between A-levels and the diploma program. Now, I think most people who are aware of what the GCSE and A-level pathway would say is that that educational system is not encouraging of an inquiry stance and process, largely because there is a lot of content that needs to be covered, and there is a very strong focus the closer children get to the end of their public schooling years. So GCSE at the end of grade 10 and A-levels at the end of grade 12. There's a strong focus there on external exams, standardized tests. So what I find very interesting and encouraging and take heart from is that even within that educational system, all of our progress on FOSIL and the FOSIL group has taken place within those educational systems. And even just one other thing to say in that regard is that even when we were at Oakham, and even within the IB diploma pathway, which has inquiry as a curriculum stance and really ought to have inquiry as a curriculum process, and has the compulsory extended essay, 4,000-word extended essay as a compulsory component of the diploma program, not all teachers approached their lessons from an inquiry stance and through an inquiry process. So my short answer, and I see Jenny would like to add something, but my short answer to that is a school is always going to be a more or less enabling inquiry environment, and we will always be struggling to identify opportunities to advance inquiry as a stance and a process. Jenny?
So my very short answer in the sort of response to Darryl's long short answer is none. There is no particular curriculum organisation that needed to be in place for the signature works. because the signature works function within the organisation system that we have. So, for example, in year 6, I go into lessons that are already timetabled and are already happening. So I go into some lessons in English and ICT and maths and science and art and DT and theology, and we work that into the curriculum that is already present. In year 12, we do that as part of the PSHE programme. Year 9 was originally part of the English lessons, teaching towards something that the English teachers would already be preparing students for their speaking listening exam. Although now we do have a period a week that is just for the signature work. So I think if you're looking to set up something like this in your school, you can't wait for an organisation system that will work. You have to work within the organisation system that you already have.
Thank you. So there's another example of why we wouldn't be here today if it weren't for Jenny. Is that okay to move on, Elizabeth?
Yeah, thank you. Perfect.
Okay. Super. So because this is the first opportunity that we've had to discuss FOSIL in this way, and I'm aware that some people have been on this journey pretty much from the beginning, like Elizabeth, and that some people may be very new to this journey, I'm just quickly going to provide key stages in the development of FOSIL leading to the present. So the first thing that I'd like to say here is that what I have done quite simply would not have been possible without colleagues like Barbara and without colleagues like Diane and Jennifer. Because the absolutely extraordinary work, and I cannot stress this enough, anybody who has looked closely at what these colleagues have done will be astonished at the thoughtful work and the tireless work that has gone into developing these models and supporting resources. And crucially, none of what I have done or we have done would have been possible had they not made the work that they had done freely available under Creative Commons. So to return to the point that Jenny made, no school that we've ever worked in has said, okay, now we are going to be totally this, and everybody immediately embraced that, and that was the end of the struggle. So that's never been the case. So what that has meant is, as Jenny has already said, is that we were not able to wait for somebody else to create the conditions or to create favorable conditions or enabling conditions for us to develop and promote an inquiry stance and process. Now, that simply wouldn't have been possible had we not been able to draw on the work of colleagues like Barbara and Diane and Jennifer and many others. And possibly even more importantly than that is the generosity of their time, their personal time, to help. Certainly when I started, I knew nothing about school librarianship. I stumbled into the library. Richard and Jean gave me a chance, and I've figured out everything else since then on my own with the help of colleagues like Barbara, Diane, and Jennifer, and others. Now, that for me is a foundational principle for FOSIL and for the FOSIL group. So freely we have received, freely we give. The reason why we do that is because it's not about us, it's because our children, and it's about equipping our children for a future that we have made very unpredictable and increasingly threatening for them. So that is the motivation for what we do. This idea of open source goes back to that encounter that I had with Seymour Papert and his influence on me. I'm not 100% sure, and I can't even remember now whether I said that I had I was blessed to meet him. What an extraordinary experience that was, and I didn't realize when I was with him what an influence he would have on my development. But that hacker spirit that gave birth to the computer revolution and that hacker spirit of figuring things out for ourselves with help from whoever can help us and sharing what we've learned with whoever is interested, that is the spirit of inquiry. And that idea of it being open source, we can adopt it, we can adapt it to meet our needs in the situation that we're in, with the support of people who know more than us, who are more experienced than us. So that is a foundational principle for the work that went before us, and the work that we have done on top of that. So that is Barbara's model that became central to the New York City Information Fluency Continuum, and then the Empire State Information Fluency Continuum, and the deeply thoughtful model that came out of work in Alberta. So those are both very influential in the development of FOSIL and ongoing work on inquiry. So while I was at Oakham, that is the third iteration on the left. That is the third iteration of the FOSIL cycle. And I just wanted to say, so that was developed in 2018. One of the things that struck me afterwards was the description that I developed for Investigate. So I'll bring that up in a second. Because FOSIL grew out of trying to solve certain practical problems relating specifically to the IB diploma extended essay, my original definition of Investigate was knowing what scholarly resources are available and being able to use them effectively. And that partly related to finding reliable sources, which needed to be scholarly for the extended essay, but then also being able to cite and reference them, which is a technical skill on some level, but actually more importantly is an academic skill. So the only reason why I am citing and referencing my sources is because I have used them to inform my own thinking. So I have an intellectual debt to other people that I need to be able to acknowledge in an appropriate way. But when we then left Oakham and were no longer working with the extended essay, I began to think a little bit more broadly about what the definition, what would be a broader definition of Investigate. So in 2024, I changed that definition to, and unfortunately, I've got a little thing covering that. So it says discerning the reliability of available sources and using them, I think it says appropriately and effectively. So really that was broadening it beyond a narrow concern with scholarly sources for the extended essay, and also maybe acknowledging that sources may take very different forms. So that version 3.1 with the updated definition is now available to download from the FOSIL Group website. And of course, if you are working in an IB school with a focus on MYP DP, it's entirely possible that you may want to continue using the version with the previous definition. Then in 2022, we developed the short version of the descriptions of the stages. And the reason for that was one of the things that excited us most about coming to Blanchelande College was the fact that Blanchelande College is a PK to 12 school, which means we have children all the way from nursery through to the end of school at age 18. And what we wanted to do there was to develop a simplified version of those descriptions specifically for use in primary schools. And it was actually extraordinarily difficult. I had been thinking about that even when I was at Oakham, but it was actually extraordinarily difficult to come up with short definitions for those stages that remained true to what was actually happening in those stages. So Jenny and I spent quite a bit of time thinking about that and discussing it, and then discussing it with Barbara. And I'm as confident as I can be that those are accurate descriptions of the kinds of things that are going on in each of those stages. So in the 2019 reimagining of the Empire State Information Fluency Continuum, Barbara and her colleagues introduced into that continuum of inquiry skills, they introduced skill sets. So they grouped the individual skills into skill sets in each of the stages. So in 2021, I integrated that or adapted that for use with FOSIL in terms of the colors. It probably is worth just mentioning for those of you who don't know that the use of color serves an important instructional purpose, even though it is possible to use the cycle without color. The color does aid both us in our instructional role, but also crucially to help students to more easily locate themselves in the inquiry process. It does also mean that at a glance, if I see orange or if I see red, I immediately have an idea of what kinds of skill sets are involved, and can imagine age-appropriate or developmentally appropriate skills for those skill sets. So that was 2021. So then just to give you an example of the extraordinary work that Barbara and her colleagues did. So there is the investigate stage with the investigate skill sets. And so, for example, evaluation and selection of evidence within sources, that then opens up into concrete skills that need to be taught and that students need to learn and need to be able to demonstrate. So there's just an example of the progression from grade 6 or year 7 through grade 7, year 8, through grade 8, year 9. And because that's a little bit small, I'll just read it so that you have a sense of how these skills are being developed. The other thing that's also interesting about this particular skill is that many of these skills are technology dependent, either by definition or in use. So what we have there is reads laterally in the digital environment to gather comprehensive overviews and corroborate information. In grade 7 is added and gather perspectives on a topic. And in grade 8, reads laterally in the digital environment to discover divergent and conflicting information as well as corroborating information. And then just to mention there that so that particular skill in grade 8 is in bold. The reason for that is because in the Empire State Information Fluency Continuum, that is a priority skill. And all of those priority skills, which is available both through the FOSIL Group website, but also on the Empire State Information Fluency Continuum website, all of those priority skills have associated graphic organizers. And those graphic organizers give us an idea, a starting point for thinking about how we would teach and assess those skills. So that brings us, that neatly brings us now to where I'm going to hand over to Hugh. So just very quickly, what we're talking about here is one of another major reason for moving across, or being excited about moving across to Blanchelande was the fact that they had done extraordinary work on framing the journey, the educational journey through school in terms of the hero's journey. And I had always thought about inquiry as a heroic undertaking. In terms of the IFLA School Library Guidelines, the hero's information to knowledge journey. So what I did with Hugh, who was the design director at Blanchelande at that time, and who had developed this these extraordinary icons for the hero's journey in classical terms, was to align the stages in the inquiry process. So those are stages in the inquiry process with, stages in the hero's journey. And I'm just going to skip through this very quickly so I can pass over to Hugh, because what we're talking about here will become clearer as he speaks. But the whole point here is that inquiry is about the inquirer. It's what's going on inside the inquirer. And Diane touched on that very powerfully this morning. And actually so did Laura, about the invisible universe that is the mind of a person, that is illuminated by knowledge. So here we have an actual inquirer setting out on a journey. What is going on in that little person's mind? What is going on in that little person's heart? What are they feeling in their stomach? It looks like they've got a spring in their step. Are they appearing to be brave when in fact they're actually terrified? So the point about this and the value of this is that it helps us to view the inquiry process more easily in terms of the heroic inquirer. So the presentation will be made available. This is just to give you an indication of what is going on in these stages. This one is particularly important because investigate. Lee has touched on both of the, Lee and Joe touched on both of these in their presentation. So this twin threat of information overload or total noise, and this three-headed monster of information disorder, I think, which is massively increased through AI. So this three-headed monster of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. And then the whole point of inquiry really is the profound struggle to become who we are. And as Alexa mentioned, the fulfillment of our deepest potentialities of being human in the world. Which brings us to the inquiry reboot. And the reason for that is really just that, as Alexa also mentioned, while we can look back and draw inspiration and strength from the past, we also need to look for the future in order to be able to equip our students for their future. So Hugh, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Darryl, for that. My name's Hugh. I'm an illustrator. Not usually the sort of person you'd expect to see talking at something like this, but hopefully it will become clear as I speak why I'm here and what I've done. As Darryl mentioned, I've been involved in Blanchelande for some time, and the brief I was given when I started to work here was to try and create a first of all a brand for the school, so a visual identity that could be used to talk to the outside world, as it were, to present the school in a positive way. This is one of the things we think about very obviously when we think about a brand, but also the brand really needed to communicate internally to inside the school, and give the students here and the teachers as well and the staff a sense of what we're doing and what the purpose of it is, what things are important, what should we be focusing on, what might it be like to do these kind of things. And we came up with the idea very quickly of the hero's journey, which is an ancient form of story which can be found ubiquitously throughout the world, throughout cultures, and throughout time. And the very short version of a hero's journey is that the hero, the individual, begins the story in a familiar and comfortable place. They then step outside of that familiar and comfortable place into a, or they receive what's called a call to adventure, which is an invitation to step outside of that comfort and into the unknown, which might be quite unpleasant. They along the way encounter various different challenges and obstacles, which eventually culminates in a decisive victory against some kind of, it could be a monster or could just be a very difficult situation. And in doing this, they're transformed by this experience, and they change fundamentally as people. And they then return back to the community or the safety that they began the story in, with something to offer and something to change that community for the better. So that's the really short version. And I think something I think it's very important to say is that, and something I tried to focus on when I was working on this project, is that we need to remember the stakes involved in a student coming to school. This is something that's been in my mind from the beginning, thinking about this hero's journey approach to education, if you like. So I think it can quite easily get lost or forgotten or obscured, the stakes of what we're doing in a school. So if you think of the routine of a school, you have the building, you have the students' alarm clock going off in the morning, they come to school, it's the same building, they see the same faces, they sit in classrooms, they sit and listen. Of course, they do things that are more interesting than that, but there's a real routine to a school. And in a lot of ways, it reminds me of this space that the hero begins the journey in, this kind of safe, familiar space. And I think it can quite easily get lost, the enormity of what you're trying to do in a school. Really, the journey of a young person to become who they are, and a person who's able to gain wisdom from knowledge and information, to go out into the world and recognize what's true and what is not true, to make good decisions. You know, this is a story with enormous stakes. You could almost say cosmic stakes, because by educating those young people, you're creating the future, you're creating the world that we're all going to live in. So I think the amazing intellectual work that's going on, and the work of the teachers and staff, as an illustrator coming to this situation or this project, I really wanted to create a sense of this, that this is it's an embodied process that these students are going through, and it has enormous stakes. It's very important. And I'm sure as people who work with young people, it's often the case that maybe students don't realize why they're doing certain things, or really how big the stakes are in what they're doing. And sometimes they have a sense that what they do doesn't really matter, you know. And of course, there are a lot of problems that come along with that in terms of mental health and so on. But I really just think it's so important that young people realize the great importance of what they're doing, and that what they do really does matter, and it is, in a sense, an epic story in itself. So Darryl talked to you very briefly through the hero's journey work that I did for Blanchelande some years ago, which is still the visual identity of the school. We wanted to reboot this set of icons, specifically aimed at explicating this inquiry process. So you can see it here. Hopefully you've had a chance to have a good look at that while I was talking. It's the same stages, obviously, but the images are different. So I'm going to just talk you through some of them, and hopefully I can kind of embellish the meaning a little bit. So, of course, the beginning of every hero's journey, as I said, is this step outside of the familiar. I think that you can see there's a difference between these two images. That the new one on the right-hand side focuses a little bit more on this, rather than the step away from the familiar, more of the step into the unknown, into this dark cave. And in doing that, we wanted to kind of create a sense of mystery in this, introduce this idea of asking questions. The idea of asking questions is, of course, very important to the inquiry process. So here, there's a bit of mystery involved. You know, we have an explorer on the left there. We have a dark cave with the door's been kind of rolled away. So has something come out of there? Is it inviting the hero to go in and explore? You know, these are the questions that I hope that we're asking ourselves as we look at this image. There's a bit more of a similarity between the previous version and the new version here. So a very important stage in the hero's journey, which I didn't mention before, is the encounter with the mentor. So there's an idea in the hero's journey story that the hero has to recognize that to become more than they currently are and to defeat their dragon, they need help. So that there's an element of humility and an element of recognizing that they are they need to step outside of themselves socially to affect a big change in the world. So here we can see the hero who looks a little bit like some sort of a pilgrim on the left, who is accepting from a mysterious figure an object which is intentionally a little bit ambiguous. This could be a book, or it could be a tablet, or it could be a mirror almost, or it could actually be some kind of a little doorway or a portal to something else. So obviously there are, and I'm sure you're all thinking that this could be a librarian, this figure on the right here, who is assisting the hero in starting their journey, maybe helping them directing them towards certain ideas or certain questions they might ask, or helping them to come up with their own questions. Doesn't have to be a librarian, it could be someone else, but obviously the librarian definitely does that. There's some ambiguity into what the librarian is handing to the hero, because there are various different ways that we can access information now, and it's important to understand that it's not just books, it's also the internet. You know, there are various different ways that the hero can be assisted by the mentor. Okay, so this one was a lot of fun. So once the hero has kind of started to ask their own questions, and they've started to go out into the world of information, maybe they've accessed the internet, maybe they've opened some books and started reading, maybe they've spoken to some people, what they will start to notice is that there are some things out there which are not true. And there are also another issue they might come up against is just the sheer overwhelming ocean of information that is available, this kind of overwhelming amount of information and books and articles and everything that they can access, and how to find their way through that. So the hero here is having to deal with two monsters in this kind of virtual space. So the first one on the left there is a snake, and the snake is kind of made out of white noise. Now the snake is comes up. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm really quite obsessed with mythology and the symbols in mythology and what they kind of mean. But a snake is a very representative of this kind of chaotic situation. I think because of the way it moves, it's very different to other animals. It's quite a sly creature, and it also, importantly, it has a forked tongue. So just think, if you think very practically about that, it has a tongue, which is the organ we use to speak, that goes in two different directions. So often this is one of the reasons why in mythology and traditional stories you'll see a snake to represent a liar or someone who isn't telling the truth. So this particular snake here has forked tongues, but it has three of them, so they're forked in two different ways. And these tongues are kind of lashing out at the hero, and the hero's having to contend with it. So these three tongues, you've probably guessed already, represent mis, dis, and malinformation. So the various different kind of lies and untruths that a student might come across when they're on their quest for truth. And then the spider on the bottom right there kind of represents this overwhelming sea of information that might be confusing in itself. So obviously there's a reference there to the web, the World Wide Web. And the hero is kind of enmeshed in this web. It's kind of sticky. It's kind of holding them back. It's stopping them from progressing in a sense, because there's just perhaps too much information to deal with. So moving on. So I think what we were thinking about here, on the left, you can see that this is the point where the hero deals with this kind of final conflict, or this decisive, or they have to win this decisive victory that I mentioned earlier. So this is like the turning point of the hero's journey. This is the thing that has to happen for everything else in the story to come together. So previously we always talked about this as a battle with a dragon. So this is a really common mythological image. You can see it in things like The Hobbit. You can see it in mythology and from all over the world. But we decided we wanted to make this a little bit more specific to the contemporary world and what students might be coming up against. So it's important to remember that this story is an embodied process. So this isn't just an intellectual thing exactly. The student is transforming as a result of this inquiry and this journey that they're going on. So what we wanted to show here with the characters was that the hero here is trying to defeat kind of a false version of themselves. So that's why they're kind of mirrored, and they look quite similar, except for the figure on the right, the antagonist, is more machine-like. The hero here is really contending with what kind of falsehoods and what kind of consequences of bad information might have on themselves. And then in the background, what I was thinking when I did this was, I was kind of thinking about the stakes, the consequences of bad information, of lies. What kind of world do you end up in when people can't tell the truth, or they can't perceive the truth, or they have no relationship with the truth? Well, you know, as I think Alexander Solzhenitsyn said something like, a totalitarian state is a place where everyone's lying about everything all the time. And really, this kind of machine-like society that we, some people might think we're kind of heading towards, is a result of not embodying the truth and not reflecting the truth. Kind of a world that is kind of damaging to the environment, that is very much about being watched and observed. And that's what this background kind of represents. There's also like a little thing kind of that came from me. This kind of reminds me of Jack and the Beanstalk a little bit. So the hero is next to a ladder. He's kind of gone up into this kind of construction site sort of scenario. And the antagonist on the right, this machine man, is kind of almost being lowered down on those chains. So I think the reason that a lot of kids like Jack and the Beanstalk in particular as a story, my children really, really love it, all of them have, is that when you're a child, as you kind of move up, you kind of grow up into the world. As you kind of ascend this beanstalk, you go up and what's there? There's giants, like these big people who have a lot of power, you know, and you have to, this is something all young people have to sort of contend with at some point. So having achieved this decisive victory, we have this is one of the easiest images to make. This image came together quite quickly. It's quite a simple image. And it's one we can recognize from a lot of different films and stories, this idea of the hero kind of walking away from this explosion happening behind them, sort of silhouetted against it. So they've destroyed the evil thing, and now they're walking towards the camera. But here, importantly, it's inverted. So instead of a dark silhouette against fire in the background, this is a figure of light against a dark background. So this is the idea that maybe any kind of falsehoods and lies have been sort of burnt away, and now we have this very innocent, pure creature sort of emerging from that destruction. And then, so this is something I always try to mention when I talk about the hero's journey. It's very easy to think of the hero's journey as a kind of an exciting story about a guy who goes out and has a very exciting fight with a dragon. People often forget about what happens after the hero defeats the dragon and is transformed by that process. What happens after that is that the hero returns home. This is really, really important. So if you look at, for example, Lord of the Rings, I read it again recently. There's an enormous, almost like a novel-sized chunk at the end of the book after the ring is destroyed. Okay, so what's happening there? All the exciting stuff has happened. Well, no, it hasn't. The whole point of this hero's journey, if you remember from the beginning, is that the hero goes out, achieves this great victory, and then comes home and changes. Not only do they transform themselves, they find their place back in their community, and by doing that, they transform their community. So this is a really important thing to remember. So here we have a kind of superhero character, kind of a transformed character. And where is he going? Just have a look. You should be able to see on the top right, he's heading back to Earth. So he's in a sense, he's got the universe at his fingertips here. He's kind of flying through space. But what's he doing? He's bringing that coin, that thing of value back to Earth. And then, of course, we kick off the process again. Of course, we needed to refresh the hero inquirer, and it's kind of a similar idea to previously. So here we have a scroll. It's both a digital and analog piece of information. If you can see it written on the scroll, there's some binary, also some sort of strange, almost magical runes or something like that. And the hero is kind of standing in that information, but also stepping out of it and looking up towards this coin, this thing of value, this thing that is emanating light. This is it's kind of a motif for the center of the inquiry cycle, just to kind of contextualize the whole thing. Now you can see it there in the middle, and the heroic inquirer in the center there is kind of reaching up. And an important thing to remember with this cycle is that it's a continual thing, and you might go forward and backwards between these stages. It's not a completely neat story, and he's kind of reaching up and kind of kicking the process off again by pointing his staff towards the open cave at the top there. So I think that's everything I've got to say. Super.
Wow, thank you so much. There has been a few, I've learned something today. It was fascinating listening to you. We've got a couple of questions, I think, in the chat box. So let me just see if I can read them out, if you give me a second. Where's she gone? So it's Eleni, I think she's called, has said, I hear the heroic journey of an inquirer, and I compare and contrast it with Kuthau's information search process that explains the emotions that are involved in the process of inquiry, the difficulties and triumphs of this process, in what ways your model resembles and differs from this model. Maybe that's a question for Darryl, I'm not sure.
So it would have been impossible to do anything on inquiry without seriously engaging with Carol Kuthau's work. So one of the things that we did very early on at Oakham when we were developing FOSIL was to look very closely at because as Hugh has said, and what ought to be obvious, but sadly quite often isn't, is that inquiry is an embodied process. The only reason why we're talking about inquiry is because we're talking about inquirers. And inquiry is the most natural response to the world that we find ourselves in. What is it? What does it do? How does it work? Now what? So there was always a cognitive, metacognitive, emotional, and social dimension to inquiry. And what we did was we did spend some time because yeah, so it would have been impossible to directly and perfectly map stages in the fossil cycle with stages in the information search process. But we have developed something, and that is available on the website to look at if people are interested, where stages in the fossil cycle blur into and through stages in the information search process, which obviously then does involve physical actions, emotional and a metacognitive dimension. So they don't map exactly, and we tried to reflect that by a color bleed. But what we are hoping to achieve through this reboot of the heroic inquiry cycle is to build as many layers of meaning as possible into the scenes, to give students an opportunity to identify with the heroic inquirer, to imagine themselves into the scenes, to imagine what is going on inside the heroic inquirer's mind, inside, emotionally, socially, but also as an instructional tool for us to encourage them to think about, to engage with, and to reflect on. So to sum that up, yes, Carol Coulthard's work was enormously influential. This really was an opportunity for us to create a more game-like setting for students to imagine themselves into, in order to be able to think about inquiry as an embodied process.
Okay, great. There's one question, it keeps jumping around, so it might have gone again. Helen Cleves. Okay, I'm not going to read out everything, but she loves the artwork. But she has a question about girls. And like obviously in the pictures, it's mainly boys, it's a man defeating. How can this model be made more accessible to girls and non-binary children? And how has it landed with the audience? So how, have your girls in your school said anything about this, or is it, yeah, tell me a bit more if you can.
So two quick things there. You are the first people to see this. So we're sharing this with you. So yeah, this is the first time that we've shared it. We developed it specifically to be shared today. So one of the challenges, and you might pick up on that, I know that we've only got 5 minutes left. You might pick up on this, but one of the challenges was how to do that in this pixelated way. So that heroic inquirer there may or may not be, I'm not sure that that is necessarily, those figures, I'm not sure are necessarily male or female. As you pointed out, that night, there is a skirt. It doesn't have to be a male knight. Again, I'm not 100% sure that that heroic inquirer there is necessarily either or. So that was one of the things that we deliberately tried to address. We faced challenging design limitations, and it's an ongoing journey. But certainly, Hugh.
Okay, just a couple of more comments. The word heroic is drawing people to think he's a man, I suspect. That's from Ruth Maloney. And Helen comes back. It isn't about the image, it's about the narrative used to frame the concept. I think it's a really good thing for us to consider and bring together. Do you know, it's sort of an ongoing journey, like you say.
And I just quickly say in response to that, and Jenny's got something to say,
Yeah.
we were very, very deliberate not to talk about the hero's journey or the heroine's journey. So I'm not sure that heroic is necessarily male or female. And that's why we were very deliberate to talk about heroic inquiry rather than the hero's inquiry journey.
And I think, as a woman, I think hero is a word that we need to reclaim for our girls. I think hero is a little bit, hero and heroine are a little bit like actor and actress. And there's certainly a move that we just use the word actor for everybody. And I think here, our girls need to see themselves as heroes of their own story. And that perhaps using something like this is something that we should be emphasizing to them, that girls can be heroes too, and actually they should be.
Fantastic. Okay, brilliant. Unless there's anything more to say there, I think we're going to bring on our next speaker, if that's all right.
Sorry, can I just say in conclusion, an extraordinary thank you to both Hugh for the work that he did on this, many, many, many hours. And also to Blanchelande College, because all of the work on this, the short version, the long version, all of that will be made freely available under Creative Commons for colleagues to adopt and adapt to their purposes. So it's entirely possible that while this is Heroic Inquiry 2, it is entirely possible that we may have a Heroic Inquiry 2.1, where as we journey with this further, it continues to evolve as we do as heroic inquirers. So thank you very much. Really appreciate your time.